Hello there guys, Elita Legionaria here, and today I'm going to be starting a new edition or new type of thing for my YouTube channel. I'm going to be doing a faction overview type thing, so I'll start doing it for Rome Total War and I'll do it for Medieval 2 Total War. I probably won't at this stage do it for some of the other games, probably because I just don't have enough information on the specifics of factions in the later games, whereas I have quite a bit with Rome Total War and with Medieval 2 because I've had quite a bit of experience with those games. I played them a lot, got a lot of hours under my belt with them both, and I've used all the factions and I know the ins and outs of them pretty darn well. So at this stage I'll do those first two. So I've just sort of thought about doing this for quite a while. I thought it'd be kind of a fun thing to do and quite interesting, and it's always cool to kind of add new types of content to the channel. So you guys can tell me what you think of that. I'm going to start the first part right now. So this part is going to be about the Roman factions. Now, how this is actually going to work is I'm going to work it so that I will be essentially doing one faction per video, but because there are 4 Roman factions and they're almost completely identical, I'll do the House of Julii, Brutii, Scipii and the SPQR all in one video, and it'll just be the Romans. So we're talking about things like their units, their strengths, what's good tactics for this faction, and I'll just be, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just talk about the factions a bit over their unit roster, and then I'll show a bunch of clips of just that faction battling in the background while I talk about tactics and blah blah blah. And like after that though, it'll be just like one faction. So next time, once I've done the next video, it'll be about Macedon, and then after that it'll be about Egypt and Seleucids and Carthage and Parthia and so on. So that way we can have a whole, probably about 25 minutes to half an hour little breakdown on each faction, depending on, some factions are more like extensive than others, so some will take longer. Rome will probably take a bit longer than some of the others because it's the biggest. So anyway, let's take a look at the unit roster here. So of course with the Romans you have the House of Julii, the House of Brutii, the House of Scipii and the SPQR or the Senate. Now, as you can see, most of you probably all know this stuff, but this is just general stuff. If you look at these unit rosters, they are like almost entirely identical. In fact, between the Senate and the Julii, it is completely identical. There is absolutely no difference in their roster at all. But with the Brutii and the Scipii, they do have slightly different gladiator, whereas the Julii and the SPQR have the Samnite gladiator. The Brutii has the Velite gladiator, and the Scipii have the Murmillo gladiator. Other than that, that's completely identical, and because I'm going to be analysing this from a multiplayer perspective, because it's what I do more, I just point that out now. It's not really going to be much here to say on campaign because I do multiplayer and that's where I've got my experience. From a multiplayer perspective, this is very minuscule, these differences in gladiators, because gladiators are almost never ever used when you see Rome being used online. It absolutely, almost virtually never. So they're more of a fun unit, so you don't really see them used, so it's pretty minuscule. If you really wanted to get down to the specifics, kind of the nitty gritty of it, the Julii and the SPQR have a marginal advantage just because the Samnite gladiator is the best out of the 3 gladiators. Other than that, honestly, they're absolutely identical, and because those units never get used, I don't really consider any of the Roman factions superior to one another. They're completely the same. So let's take a look at some of their units. So obviously they have peasants, everyone has these. What would you want to be using peasants for? Only for a meat shield or a charge absorption, or someone just waste their missiles on. Honestly, every faction has this. It's going to be the same description throughout all the factions. There is a bit of an advantage for barbarian peasants, but we won't go into that until we get to a barbarian faction. But honestly, you won't be seeing them used that much. Then we have the Town Watch. Again, every faction has something like the Town Watch. It's great for a peeler screen to absorb enemy peeler shots, take up missile fire, a charge absorption, same sort of thing as the peasant. Just you can actually form into a line unlike the peasant. So again, nothing special there. Every faction has those. So now we start moving on to Rome's individual units. We have the Auxilia. The Auxilia is a light spearman type unit. It's got a bonus to its cavalry, combat bonus in woods, well armor, good stamina, can sap. Now, The Auxilia I wouldn't recommend using that much. If you really want to use a spear unit in your Roman armies, use the Triarii, it's just better. The Auxilia, it will not stop. It'll stop some of the light cavalry units to medium cav, but it won't stop heavy cavalry. It loses to them. So don't even try that. But what you can do with them is mix them with your own cavalry, which is can be very helpful, especially if you're fighting in the woods there, because they'll fight better in the woods and cavalry fight worse in the woods, so they can be useful there. But overall, I wouldn't recommend this unit to be used very often. Then we have the Primarian units, the Stadi, the Triarii, and the Principe. Again, these units don't get used very often in multiplayer unless someone's playing specifically Primarian build, which is I've done a few times. If you're actually interested in seeing that, you can look up type in the word Primarian on my channel, and you'll get a bunch of different battles where I've used Primarian rules. But to be honest, it's not very common. They're okay units, but they're not in multiplayer. They're not going to do that great for you. They are cheap though, so you can put a bunch of upgrades on them. They're starty, like in terms of campaign, they're good opening units, but in terms of multiplayer, you don't get to see them used very much. They're still Roman units, they've still got Peeler, and they've still got some pretty good discipline and stuff, so these two units will do okay. The Triarii can be quite effective if you can work it in the same way as the Auxilia. It's just a bit better than the Auxilia as well. Fighting in the woods with them against enemy cav is quite effective as well. They can be used quite helpfully in helping your own cavalry defeat like stronger cav, so they're not entirely a useless unit, but overall, as much as I like Triarii, they are not really that overall effective. You've got to use them in a kind of specific method to get the best out of them. The Principe is just a bit heavier version of the Triarii. It's not too shabby, it'll hold in there, it's okay, but there are a lot of units that will beat it up pretty easily as well. So these units you're really only going to see if you're playing Primarian games, which are a lot of fun, where they can be quite fun to use, and you can fight in that 80s triple X formation that the Romans used to use. So other than that, honestly, you don't see these units used very often. So moving on, we have the Early Legionary Cohort. The Early Legionary Cohort's a bit stronger there, as you can see, pretty good peeler damage, good defense, and attack's solid enough. It's the first Roman unit that can do the testudo, which is their ability to go into the mobile tortoise formation, where they'll hold up their shields, and it gives them pretty much almost complete immunity to arrows if it's anything from the side or the front. Very effective in sieges, but you won't use it that much in multiplayer outside of a siege. But there are certain places for it. Overall, it's a pretty solid unit that's cheap. You can put a few upgrades on it. It's quite well used on the flanks. Most people in multiplayer won't be using this unit as a frontline infantry unit unless it's a low money game. Overall, it will be used on the flanks or as a supporting unit. But it's still got Peeler, so if you can get into the flank of a unit and toss some Peeler, it can be quite dangerous. It's quite cheap, so it can be well upgraded, so it's quite good in low money games as well as a mainliner. But overall, you won't see its use that much. Then we have the Samnite Gladiator for the Julii, or I'll just sort of put this into any of the gladiators for all the factions here. Honestly, this unit is almost never used. It's not really that recommended. They've got some alright stats, but they're only a half strength unit, and they don't actually have a formation. They're just a big circular blob. And I mean, they're not that useful, to be honest. They're more of a kind of have fun with unit, not really that effective at all. Maybe if you're trying to recreate a historical battle, perhaps like the uprising, of Spartacus and that, where you had some gladiators, that might be where you'd use them. But to be honest, you're just not going to see them online, so I wouldn't really bother with them if I were you. Moving on now, we have the steady, solid, the real hard hitter of or not like real solid, kind of just solid Roman unit here is the Legionary Cohort. This is like their staple unit, if you will. Good stats, good defense, and it's got the same missile damage as the Early Legionary Cohort. It has higher morale. It can also do the testudo. This is a good unit. It can match a lot of units in this game. There are only a few units that are really that much better than this unit, and it's pretty cheap. You can put a bunch of upgrades on it. It's solid, and it looks just like the typical Roman Imperial period infantry. It represents Rome well. It's a good unit. Now, it won't be the most commonly used infantry online, simply because the more elite versions tend to be used, but this is a good mainline infantry, and it will be very reliable against most every faction you'll be facing, as long as you work them properly with the supporting units around them. So it's a good unit. Moving on, we have the two elite Roman infantry units. We have the Praetorian Cohort. We'll start with the Praetorian. The Praetorian Cohort, as you can see, higher attack, good defense, and higher missile damage as well. Also do the testudo. This is where there's much more armor involved, more good morale. And it's a very, very good unit. This is a solid unit with only probably 3 or so units really being more of a threat to it. To be honest, it's a unit that it will defeat 90% of all other units in this game. Only things like Spartans and a few other bits and pieces can really outperform the Praetorian cohort in this game, so it's a good one. It's a bit more expensive, but it can make a very, very effective infantry, and it will defeat most other infantry types in this game, so very good infantry there. However, it has a tendency to be overshadowed by the next unit. That's the Urban Cohort. The Urban Cohort is, in my opinion, the most effective infantry unit in this game. Now, some people are going to say Spartan Hoplites are better. Well, Spartan Hoplites can beat Urbans 1-for-1. Urbans can also defeat Spartan Hoplites 1-for-1 if you know what you're doing with them. Urbans are much cheaper, they're much more diverse, they're much more flexible. Overall, they're far more useful all around than Spartans, which is why I consider them to be superior. And in my opinion, this is the best infantry unit in Rome Total War all around. Apart from Spartan Hoplites, it will absolutely destroy every single type of infantry unit in this game if it faces them 1-for-1. So, as you can see, very, very high defense and missile damage and high attack. It's got that excellent morale with very well armoured, and it's got good stamina. Urban Cohort's morale is extremely high. They can be literally pinned on things, hammered and anviled and circled and stuff, and often still come out on top of the fight. They are a very frustrating unit at times. Most cost-effective unit in the game really for what you get out of them, and really essentially overpowered for their price and what they are. And not very historically accurate, because the Urban Cohorts were not really an elite unit in the real Roman army. But in this game they are supreme units. You'll see Roman players spamming them over and over and over again because they are so effective. So you can hardly ever go wrong with Urban Cohorts. The best infantry unit in the game in my opinion. Then we have the Arcani. This is much like the Gladiator. It's a cool little unit, kind of like a guy with a mask and a black cape and a couple of swords. It's a very cool assassin-like type unit. But to be honest, it's not very practical. It's pretty solid stats and all that, but only 32 men in the unit. It's going to get cleaned out pretty quickly, and it can only hide while it's staying still. If it can move around and still be hidden, that would be good, like you can in later games. But it doesn't. That was never a feature in Rome Total War. So honestly, this unit's kind of a gimmicky, fun unit, but I wouldn't recommend it anywhere unless you're just sort of mucking around. But it does look cool. Then we have the two very unique units here, the early Legionary First Cohort and the Legionary First Cohort. This is like an extra strength unit. It has another third of the additional men numbers added to it on every scale. So normal scale on Roman infantry is 82 for large scale. So normal numbers rather is large scale 82. Well, they get an extra third, so they get another 40 men in each unit. And they have morale boosting, so they boost all the units around them. Very, very helpful, particularly in 31k games when you have like a general boosting the morale of units and then a Legionary First Cohort or early Legionary First Cohort doing the same thing. So you're getting two units giving your men a morale boost, and it is very, very helpful. Overall though, very expensive, so you don't want to lose them, and if you do lose them you can cause chain routes in your army if you're not careful. So be careful in lower money games. They're risky to take because they do take a lot of your money, so be careful when you use these guys, but very helpful if you're able to use them correctly. Now we have Rome's archer units. We have Roman archers, which is just a standard archer, pretty effective archer. Most factions have an archer of equivalent type, and it will do just the general archer role. Very useful and helpful though. Then we have the Velites and the Light Auxilia. These units I wouldn't recommend to use against anything other than elephants. They're good at getting rid of elephants, are all skirmisher units, but other than that, skirmisher units are pointless in this game except for a peel screen. You won't see these used for anything other than elephant destruction, and most people will still choose archers. So anyway, we got the next we got the Archer Auxilia. This is a good archer unit, long range, good defense, and extra damage. Very, very helpful unit for Rome, but it is a bit more expensive, so it can chip into your funds per game, so you have to be careful in the selection over the other Roman archers. But it does give Rome quite an effective skirmishing ability, which is very, very helpful to Rome. Then we have the pigs, which are pointless, more of a laughing thing. They don't work against the elephants, believe it or not. They simply don't put them amok. The only point to have pigs is if you want your men to have a nice set of fried bacon at the end of the battle, because they're really just pointless. The dogs are a bit more useful. They're good at running off some skirmishes, causing a bit of a scare effect, but for Rome that's not really important. Honestly, not that great a unit. Again, more of a kind of fun unit, but they have some uses, and they are somewhat historically accurate as dogs were used in warfare. Next we move on to Rome's cavalry. Rome's cavalry is a bit of a deceptive thing, because in real life Rome was not, at least in this time period, Rome was not renowned for effective cavalry, like for having effective cavalry of its own really. It relied on auxiliary types to do it. But in Rome Total War, they've got some very good cavalry, and when you combine that with their extremely powerful infantry, it does essentially make the faction a bit overpowered. But that's not very historically accurate. First we have the Equites, just a typical light cavalry, good for running off skirmishers, archers. It's not too bad in supporting a heavy cavalry fight with some encirclements and things like that, but don't expect too much out of this unit. Just use it in a typical light cavalry role, kind of disruption, that kind of thing. Running off routers and that sort of thing. Quite handy in that regard, but other than that, not that great. The Roman cavalry is essentially just sort of a beefed up version of the Equite. I recommend using it in a similar role. However, it can be used more effectively in a melee fight with some of the heavier cavalry if you use it in support with other units and use it in the encirclements and things, but overall it's a similar tactical role to the Equite, but nothing too drastically great there. It's not that effective. Moving on, we have the legionary cavalry. This is where Rome's cavalry starts to get quite good. Legionary cavalry are nothing too special when they're charging, but they've got a big shield, 22 melee defense. They're quite good in a melee fight. If you do it right, they can defeat companion cavalry and sacred band cavalry in a melee fight. Don't go toe-to-toe in charge fights with those because you will lose, but if you can get a good melee battle with them, they can quite often win it. It is quite a good cavalry unit, and it can be used to good effect in this game, giving Rome quite a bit of option. Then we have the General Bodyguard unit. It's got good stats and it's got those 2 hit points that makes it strong, but because it's only half strength, it is not really all that effective to use. It's not too bad in the start of a campaign against enemy cavalry units that are weaker, but in multiplayer it's not that great. It has got the fast moving trait, which allows it to get around the battlefield quite quickly, so that's kind of handy, but aside from that, not really that effective. Next we have Rome's supremely brilliant cav, is the Praetorian cavalry. Very good stats there, as you can see, good numbers, very good in a melee fight and quite capable in a charging fight if necessary. This cavalry can defeat most cavalry types in this game, with only cataphracts, cataphract camels and chariots being much of an issue. That's just the phone, guys, just go answer that. Sorry about that, guys. Getting back to what I was talking about, Praetorian cavalry, very good at melee fighting, and really only cavalry that can defeat Praetorian cavalry are cataphract camels, headhunting maidens, and chariots. Really, basically, there are very few other things that can compete with them. They'll defeat Macedonians, all the Macedonians cav, all the Carthage cavalry, all the barbarian type cavalry. They'll defeat Cappadocian cavalry. They really are very supreme cavalry, and when you support them with their own cohorts, it really gives you an extremely powerful combination, making Rome very powerful on the battlefield at all times. Moving on, we've got the Roman armour general. Basically, essentially the same thing applies to the other normal Roman general, just this one's a bit stronger, more defence, and it's quite hardy in a battle. Then we've got the Cavalry Auxilia. This gives Rome a good skirmishing cavalry. It can cause quite a little hassle if you put the upgrades on. It can be quite effective in battle. Good at running off horse archers, as are most kind of this Jav cav. So very little useful little tool there to Rome. It gives just Rome a little more options, and it's already got a lot of options. So it's a very effective piece of cavalry to have indeed. Then we've got the artillery types here. I seriously, in this game, ballistas, scorpions, and repeating ballistas, I really would not bother with them. They're just not worth anything. Honestly, I've never used them, and they when you just don't need them. They're just not good online at all. When you're wanting to siege, using an onager and heavy onagers are good because they're quite good against walls. But honestly, don't use them online. They're not unless it's a siege, don't use them because they're not really worth anything for use. So that is the Roman unit roster. It's a very powerful faction that covers a lot of areas. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to talk about some of the viable tactics and various builds and strengths of Rome and weaknesses of Rome and what's good against Rome and what Rome's good against and what Rome's weak against and blah blah blah. We'll just sort of get into some more details and you'll see some nice sort of battle sequences running in the background. So anyway, let's get on to it. Roman tactics. Okay guys, so tactics for Rome. Rome has really very wide range of tactics which it can use, which does effectively make Rome the most diverse faction in the game, and personally, in my opinion, the best faction in the game. You'll find most people would probably agree with me on that. There are some people who will make arguments for other factions, but generally all around the board, Rome is the best faction in the game. So in this fight here, you're seeing the Peeler. This is a Rome versus Rome battle that you're seeing here, and you just saw before just how effective those Peeler were. Peeler gives Rome the ability to very, very effectively damage enemy infantry units or cavalry units, depending, usually infantry units, before they even begin the engagement, which allows that supreme Roman infantry to quickly gain the edge over its opponent very, very quickly. In the case of a Rome versus Rome battle, or basically any faction where you know you're going to be faced with Peeler being thrown in your face, you need to have some sort of unit kind of soaking it up, some kind of crummy unit like a town watch or skirmisher unit or whatever like that, because otherwise the Peeler's going to take up, like this is an urban cohort throwing Peeler at some pikemen there, they can take up to 20 men out of that pike unit, and considering that pike unit's already inferior to urban cohort, they're going to get quickly destroyed. So if you are playing as Rome, you should always try to get your Peeler off first in a fight, because if you can get your Peeler off, you're going to quite significantly turn an infantry fight into your favour. And as I explained before, there is actually no infantry unit in this game except the Spartans that can match urban cohorts. So if urban cohorts are able to throw their Peeler off into an enemy infantry unit, which they're already better than and will already be able to beat, they'll beat them that much faster. So as Rome, you should always try to look to get your Peeler off in a battle, because it will significantly turn an already favourable part of the fight more in your favour and allow you to even have more opportunity. So if you're versing Rome, be sure to have a Peeler screen to soak up enemy Peeler, because you don't want that Peeler being able to get into your own troops and waste them up, because those Roman infantry will defeat you, because Roman infantry is the best all-round infantry in the game, so it's going to be able to clean out any other infantry type. So it's very, very important that you don't let those Peeler hit you. But if you are playing as Rome, it is important, or it's very helpful if you can get those Roman... Ooh, that there, sorry. Bit of a lag spike. But anyway, let's go on to some more wider range of tactics that Rome's got. Now, as you can see on screen, here's a lot of cavalry work going on, and this is another side to Rome that's very, very helpful, is that Rome has the ability to bring a large cavalry build as opposed to what is traditional large infantry build. So because Rome has really, really good infantry and then really, really good cavalry, they work together so well, and you can be quite creative with your builds with Rome. For instance, you can bring like a bunch of Praetorian cavalry as your main killing force, and just a few lighter infantry types, and still be very, very effective, because that cavalry is very, very powerful. So sometimes, you know, the key advantage for Roman tactics, or tactics of Rome, is to be unpredictable, because Rome has such a wide variety of units to bring to the battlefield. So by being that unpredictable, Rome can be a bit extra dominant, because it has this ability to keep your opponent guessing. So this makes Rome very good for kind of battling everyone, because it has the ability to kind of have something for everyone on the field. So for instance, in a fight like here you're seeing against barbarian factions like Gaul and Germania, Roman infantry is going to be superior most of the time, so infantry battles are very, very key here. But for a faction like Parthia, you could bring a mixture of cavalry and say Triarii, and you'd be quite effective against that. But then again, for a faction like Egypt, you wouldn't want to do that, because your cavalry wouldn't be able to match those chariots. So what you need to do is be able to kind of work out what faction you're fighting, and then a strength of Rome is the ability to look at that faction and think, right, what units are going to be good against that faction? And because Rome's got so many options, Rome can kind of do a bit of everything, because Rome can kind of look at a faction that might be opposing and think, right, infantry is a good counter here, and you know Roman infantry is going to be good, or cavalry is going to be a better option here, and you've still got really good cavalry, or skirmishing is good quality here, and you've got some good skirmishing ability as well. So Rome's strength all round really lies in its all-roundedness, but mostly its infantry is the best, but its cavalry and skirmishing is very good as well. So Rome can also very effectively work as a rush or a balanced build or a skirmish build because of that variety. So for instance, say you wanted to bring an all infantry, all cavalry build, no archers, you could easily do it and be very effective because Rome can do a very, very good rush. Or if you wanted to do a big skirmishing build, lots of archers, very few infantry, or lots of cavalry, lots of archers, or whatever, you can do that because Rome has that variety. So again, it depends on the map, their opponent, or what you're trying to do, but basically Rome has this enormous pool of options at its disposal, which is why Rome is the most diverse faction in Rome Total War, and basically for that reason is also the best, because not only are its units extremely powerful, it has this enormous array of options at its disposal, which just means it's better all around. At the same time, because it's such high quality units that are better than most other units in the game, it means Rome's the best faction. So you'll most likely be seeing urban cohorts and Praetorian cavalry online, which is very, very combination. It's a very, very powerful combination, and a lot of ways overpowered, unless it's 31k where it's all kind of counted, which is what you're seeing on screen here. But what you really want to be able to do with Rome is you need to try and work to its strengths, which are a bit of everything like I've been talking about. So if you're wanting to play to Rome's greatest strengths, you're probably wanting to work with infantry because that's where Rome is the best and has the most variety, but you can work all around the board. Basically what I recommend is assessing your opponent's faction and what they're weak against, and then bring Rome's ability to counter it, which Rome will likely have. So it just depends on what faction you're facing and what map you're being on. So, you know, like Rome is basically good everywhere, but infantry tends to be the best options. And like I said, it should easily clean out most any faction in an infantry fight. The Greek city-states has got the Spartans, but they're not going to be able to afford enough of those Spartans to match the urbans, so very unlikely you'll have any trouble in an infantry scrap with Rome, unless you're versing another Roman player, of course, because that Roman infantry is just superior. So you need to try and get that superiority, and again, like I said at the start there, the P-Lib will make a big difference to that and will make it even easier for you, and that's very, very helpful in a fight, indeed. So what are factions that Rome is good against? Let's talk about that. Rome, as I said slightly earlier on, is pretty much good against everyone because of its variety. However, it does have a few faction weaknesses. But talking about its strengths first, what factions is it particularly good against? It's particularly good against Carthage. It's particularly good against Macedon. It's good against itself. It's a good way to fight Romans with other Romans. It's very good against most every barbarian faction. However, it can have some trouble with factions like Scythia, Britannia and Germania if you do it right with those factions, but for the most part it will easily clean out any other barbarian faction and those factions as well if you don't do it properly. It's very good, as you saw there, at taking on conventional pike lines. As you see, those bronze shield pikemen all just chain route as soon as they got hit by those peelers, so there's a reason why you should always shield from peeler as well. And Rome is very good at taking on standard infantry fights, standard cavalry fights. Rome usually owns those fights simply because it's got better stuff in that area. So try and get in conventional fights. You're very well set up for Rome. It'll do a very good job. What factions has Rome got a bit of a weakness to? Now Rome tends to be weak to skirmish-based factions and sort of eastern factions. It's not to say it's weak to them, because it's still good at beating them, but they're the faction I would recommend using against Rome because they tend to do the best. So factions like Egypt is very good at killing Rome because it can skirmish and whittle Rome down and then use its chariots for scare effect. The Seleucids, because of their wide variety of options and the ability to do skirmish. Parthia is also rather good at it. Armenia is also quite good. And if you use a skirmish build with Pontus, that's also quite effective as well. But you should never it's not a shoo-in with those factions though, because Rome is still very good at taking on even its weakest factions. So I kind of recommend skirmishing Rome down, because you need to kind of whittle down their infantry strength and their cavalry strength, because otherwise they usually beat you in that department, which is why you want to effectively just kind of skirmish them out a bit, because Rome can skirmish, but there are other factions that are quite a bit better than Rome at it. So again, you kind of need to assess what factions you're facing, where you're facing them, like what maps, working with your strengths there. That Roman infantry is very, very strong, and you can usually assess how you're going to do depending on, I mean, it'll all come down to your opponent's ability as well, which is something you can't predict. But overall, Rome gives you such an enormous array of options, it's such powerful quality units, it's very, very likely that you're going to have the advantage with Rome. It just depends, honestly, the faction I have the most trouble facing when I'm Rome facing against is Egypt, because Egypt is very, very good against Rome. Germania is also very good against Rome if you know how to work them. Basically anything with chariots, skirmishing, lots of powerful heavy cavalry, wedge charges is a good way to break up Roman infantry. Another strength too of Rome is the flexibility, obviously, in that discipline, because you've got such high discipline, such high morale, but at the same time you're able to swiftly move around flanks and things. It makes Rome very flexible on the battlefield. So for some factions it's hard to keep up with Rome. So some of the more pike orientated factions, skirmishing factions, it all just depends on micro and that sort of thing. You want to be very careful when dealing with that, because Rome can easily move onto flanks and can usually, for instance, you can have a unit like Urban Cohort hold up like 2 or 3 units quite easily by itself, or you have a major Rome, a flanking unit on the other side of a Rome, like using your Rome units to get another flank or something like that. So it's very, very, flexible and manoeuvrable, giving it a lot of tactical battlefield options, because it can move about quickly and it can still hold its own even in reduced numbers because of the high morale of its units. So you have a very, very wide pool of options there as well in terms of tactics. And I had another lag spike then, so apologies. But seriously guys, if you're a new player to Rome Total War, use Rome, because it's the strongest faction in the game. The Roman faction is the strongest faction in the game. They'll forgive you if you make mistakes more than other factions, because you don't have to use them quite specifically. You have a wide variety of options, so you can experiment a lot, try and get your experience. Okay, now here's a good way of killing Roman troops, and this works for anything, is elephants. As long as you don't let those elephants go amok and keep them out of arrow range so they won't go amok, you should be able to rip into Roman troops pretty quickly, quite well there. So I mean, take heavy cavalry like cataphracts, companion cav and wedge and things like elephants and stuff is quite good for breaking up Roman troops, because that kind of shocking, massive shock hit, if you can get a chain rout going among the Romans, it can mass rout them, so it's a good way to counter them there. But a Roman player is if a Roman player knows this, he's very easily able to counter that as well. So it's definitely an absolutely superb faction, because it has an enormous ability to cover all these different areas, and you can use it in so many different ways. It's very good at rush builds, very good at balance builds, very good at skirmish builds, very good at flexible maneuvers. Its infantry is so powerful and so solid, it's got such great supported cavalry, skirmishing, so quite good skirmish abilities. It just gives you so many options and so many different abilities, and it can be hard sometimes as a person facing Rome to predict what that Roman player is going to do, and that's another massive advantage of Rome. So it is honestly just a supreme faction. You really just won't go wrong with this. I recommend just experimenting with it, but your infantry is your most solid component, but it means it's got a lot of very good supporting options. It's very good in sieges because it's got great artillery options. Here's a build right here on the screen that's got no infantry in it at all, and it's absolutely fantastic, this build. You can rip the crap out of people with your archers, and you've got some massively powerful cavalry options, and you can just tear into them. It's an insanely good build, and a very tricky one, and not a single unit of infantry in it, and it's just another brilliant piece of Roman build. So it is a very, very good faction for just covering every area. I know I keep saying this, but honestly it's just something I have to stress with Rome. It's just the ability to do something. So you can rely on your troops to have extremely high morale as well, so I would not worry too much about too many things. Your troops will not, unless they're facing factions that cause scare effects like Germania, and that still requires the German player to use them very specifically. You're going to find Rome will win any infantry scrap it gets into, because it's got such high morale. What you need to be doing is assessing your opponent's faction, and then you need to kind of work with what Rome has to defeat it. And because Rome has such an ease of choosing different options and abilities, it's actually pretty easy to do so. So because of Rome's flexibility as flexibility on the field as maneuvers and flexibility because of existing existing variety in its unit roster. It doesn't mean you have any startling weaknesses. Rome really has no weaknesses. It has a few minor weaknesses, but nothing too startling. So it just means that as you go on the field, you can be confident in your Roman troops' ability to kind of counter every situation they get into. But it will have a bit of a trick with Egypt and skirmishing if you're not careful. So I wouldn't always recommend it against Egypt. It's not to say it can't defeat Egypt, but it's just kind of tricky. Especially with the chariots. So Rome has a bit of a weakness to wedge charging, like you can see here. I'll do a big wedge charge in through the troops there, and it'll cause some big routes and things. So you need to be careful of cavalry wedge charging your infantry, because it kind of messes up their formation. You need to watch chariots and skirmishing to whittle down your opponent. But if you can take a straight on infantry fight and a straight on cavalry fight, your Roman troops are very likely to defeat it. So honestly guys, I'll probably just be repeating myself. I said much more, but if you're a new player, take Rome, learn with Rome. It's the easiest faction to use, and it's the most forgiving of your mistakes. So anyway guys, Elita Legionaria here, signing off. Hope this helps, and I'll see you soon next time for Macedon.